BP has paid over $23 billion to help people and businesses who were affected and to cover cleanup costs. Today, the beaches and Gulf are open for everyone to enjoy, and many areas are reporting their best tourism seasons in years. We've shared what we've learned with governments and across the industry so we can all produce energy more safely. I want you to know there's another commitment BP takes just as seriously, our commitment to America.
While we hate to assume anything, let's assume for a moment the people at British Petroleum were not thrilled to see a report recently from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, noting nearly 10 million gallons of crude oil has mucked up the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico floor, a footprint or bathtub ring of deadly oil the size of Rhode Island. And remember, BP will be the first to tell you in commercials, such as the one you saw, all about the wonderful work they've done to clean up the Gulf after the Deepwater Horizon rig blowout more than 4 years ago. Let's make some sense of this. Welcome to MidPoint. Professor Emeritus at the LSU Environmental Sciences School, right there on the doorstep of the disaster, Dr. Edward Overton joins us. Doctor, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Doctor, is it fair to say that BP, every single time we see commercials such as we saw just a few moments ago, they are flat out lying every time they say that things are so much better in the Gulf of Mexico and they've done everything they possibly can?
I wouldn't say they're lying at all. The paper that you're referring to talked about data that was collected immediately after the spill back in 2010 and 2011. The data was finally made available to the public because of the legal case in January of 2014. And these scientists took data that was collected in and around the time of the spill. So what they're showing was what it looked like back in the 2010, 2011 timeframe. Now, what happens is, of course, that oil that's spilled into the Gulf, most of that oil gets degraded very quickly by naturally occurring bacteria. So what they were really outlining in that paper, for anybody that read it carefully, was the areal extent that got contaminated on the bottom of the Gulf. There were two spills, one that came to the surface and another that never got to the surface. And of course, we couldn't see where that the deep spill went, and that's what that paper highlighted, was the areas of the deep spill. So BP has spent a lot of money, they've done a lot of work, but it's still, oil was spilled in the deep ocean as well as on the ocean surface. We saw what was on the surface, we couldn't see what was on the bottom, and this paper highlights where that oil went. It did not say in any way, shape, or form that the oil is still there. We were looking at compounds that don't degrade very readily in the oil. A small fraction of the components in oil don't degrade, and they looked at one of those compounds and said, hey, the oil was here back in the 2010-11 time frame.
But is it fair to say the long-term effects of what was there and what still remains on the ocean floor is something that will be with us for many decades still and will certainly affect marine life, the coral life that's there, and so much of the shoreline? It's not as if it was all just cleaned up and went away, correct?
Well, most of the impacts have already occurred, right? During an oil spill, the impacts, the vast majority of the impacts occur within a short time of the spill when the oil comes to shore, when you see exposure. All this paper said was that the oil was there. Now, remember, most of the components of oil degrade very quickly. In literally in a matter of days, half of the oil exposed can go away if under the right conditions. And in the deep ocean, you had plenty of oxygen, and the oil that was dispersed in the deep ocean was in really tiny droplets. So that meant you had those ideal conditions for the bacteria.
Let me ask you about this, Dr. Overton. I only have a minute left. I apologize for the time, but we want to make sure we get one last thing in here. BP recently wrote an op-ed on Politico that said, no, BP didn't ruin the Gulf. Do you agree with that assertion?
Yes. BP damaged the Gulf. They didn't ruin it. There's a big, big difference. The lingering effects of the spill will be felt in small areas of the Gulf, certain areas along the coastline, and perhaps in the deep ocean. The entire Gulf of Mexico is in pretty good shape ecologically. You can go down there and catch massive quantities of fish and enjoy recreation along the Gulf and enjoy eating the Gulf seafood. I would not agree in any way, shape, or form that the Gulf has been ruined by that oil, but not ruined.
Very interesting indeed, Dr. Overton, because I'll tell you what, I'm sure you know that you're on the other end of a lot of arguments on this. It's something that I think we will follow up on in the months ahead and see how things are in the Gulf of Mexico from here on out. Dr. Overton, thank you so much for joining us and your comments.
Thank you.
All right, after a short break, new and very public ammunition for those who swear there is voter fraud in America. And at 22 minutes after the hour, why wait for the expensive TV ads to buy a car when there's Twitter? Simply put, Twitter's out there doing it in just a few short characters. They're getting you to spend money. And as a matter of fact, you're listening more to them than the TV ads. It's all coming up right here on MidPoint.